Hey everybody, welcome back to Franchise Player, and today we have a very special video. We're going to be checking out what I think is the greatest portable gaming generation of all time, and that features two handheld heavyweights, the PSP and the DS Lite. The early to mid 2000s were such a special era for handheld gaming. You had the new kid on the scene, the PlayStation Portable, which was, I think, definitely scaring Nintendo a bit because Nintendo was coming out with the Nintendo DS, which was coming off the huge success that the Game Boy Advance was, and Nintendo wanted to keep that crown as the GOAT of the handhelds. Now, keep in mind when the PSP and the DS came out, this was, practically 2 decades ago. Not everyone had some kind of electronic device in their pocket like nowadays with smartphones. So handheld gaming was huge. A lot of people had portable devices for music and, watching movies like portable DVD players. So whether you were a kid, a teenager, or, a full-fledged adult, you probably had a PSP or a DS, or at the very least knew somebody that had one. The PSP had launched here in North America back in March of 2005, so we're closing in on that 2-decade birthday for the PSP. Crazy it's been that long, but before the launch of the PSP, it was really getting ready to kind of shake up the whole gaming landscape as we knew it. It was rumored and kind of shown off at this point that the PSP was going to be bringing you PS2 quality games on the go, and we had never really seen true console quality games on the go to this level, and it was exciting. I know myself, my friends, and pretty much everyone who's into gaming back then couldn't wait to get their hands on a PSP. The PSP was a true powerhouse from the very beginning. It started to flex its muscle with things like playing movies via the UMD. I know that ended up not being a very popular format. There was a web browser on the PSP, which you got to think back, 2005, man, that was pretty cool to have in your pocket, especially on a gaming device. A lot of people were downloading music on their PSPs and using this as a portable music player. At the time, remember, iPods were big. Microsoft even tried their hand in this and had the Zune. So PlayStation was like, why not? Let's have music on the go. And of course, online play, which for the early to mid 2000s, online play on a portable device was huge. What was crazy about the PSP is that this thing was my first handheld after my Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance, the GBA, was my first handheld ever that was truly mine. And when I got a PSP, it was pretty much shared between me and my dad, but it was a wild upgrade. I mean, going from the GBA, which I still love, to something like the PSP felt like alien technology. I mean, the fact that I could play ad hoc locally, I could play this thing online. I was watching UMD movies that we'd pick up from cheap from places like, Fry's Electronics or GameStop, and had the ability to access the PlayStation Store later on. And I think the quality of the games is another reason why this handheld, at least at the time, felt like it was light years ahead of anything else. I mean, you had open world Grand Theft Auto games like Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories, which were true console quality games on the go. And I mean, matter of fact, let's jump into the PSP library right now and talk about some of the bangers on it that still hold up well today. So unlike the PS Vita, RIP, the PSP actually had amazing first-party support from Sony and third-party support. Developers loved to port games and publish games for the PSP, and there's almost an endless amount of great games on this console. One of my personal favorite titles on the PSP is Daxter. So if you played the Jak and Daxter games on PS2, you're well aware of who our buddy Daxter is, and hell of a game. I think easily one of the best 3D platformers on the PSP. And it's a real shame that this game hasn't been either remastered or remade in any capacity. I know you can play it now on PS5, and it's technically just the PSP version, but I think this game would sell really well if they remade it. But yeah, amazing 3D platformer. If you're a Metal Gear Solid fan, the PSP also had you covered. You have the Metal Gear Acid games, which are kind of like a card game slash turn-based game. I haven't played too many of those, but there's also Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which is more of a traditional Metal Gear Solid game, and easily one of the best looking games graphically on the PSP, and it still holds up really well. If I could only have access to one handheld gaming library for the rest of my life, the PSP would not be a bad choice. I mean, it got you covered in pretty much every category. In racing, you have Gran Turismo on PSP, which wasn't as popular as other Gran Turismo games, but hey, it's still Gran Turismo on the go. You had some Burnout titles, which were huge in the early to mid 2000s, amazing destruction racing games. You had a couple God of War titles on the PSP, like God of War Chains of Olympus. If you're a Mega Man fan, Capcom definitely had you covered on the PSP with games like Mega Man Maverick Hunter X. You had Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, which sold really well on the PSP. You have the Third Birthday, which is in the Parasite Eve series. And another thing that people kind of overlook on the PSP is all of the arcade collections that you had. There's a Sega arcade collection, there's an SNK arcade classics collection, and there's some Midway ones as well. So whatever you're into, the PSP pretty much has you covered. This generation of handheld gaming was just really unique. I mean, we'll dive into the DS here in just a bit, but the PSP in particular, it really seemed like developers were just not afraid to take risks at this point, and you would see really kind of just out there game titles. There were really funny accessories like, iPet here on the PSP. Is this game going to change your life? No, but the camera was definitely a cool feature. And I think there was also in Japan a GPS device that you could get for your PSP. So if you were driving, you were able to have that as your GPS function in the car. Back in the day, there was not touchscreens with GPS, and not many people had smartphones yet. So the PSP was all over the place, and I think the PSP will always hold a very special place in my heart. If you've never had a PSP before and you're interested in picking one up, I did a PSP buying guide here on the channel a while back, but if you don't want to take the time to watch that and learn some more of the in-depth stuff, there's a few different models you want to keep your eyes out for. There's the original 1000, known as the Fat. There's the 2000, which is a slimmer device. There's the 3000 here, which I used in a majority of this video. I think that's pretty much the cream of the crop, man. I love the 3000, gorgeous screen. And there's also the PSP Go, which is an all-digital console. So if you're more of a physical collector or want the ability to maybe watch PSP UMD videos, then you might want to stay away from the PSP Go. Now we're moving on to the Nintendo DS portion of the video here, and the Nintendo DS came out here in North America back in November of 2004. So over that 20-year mark, next year the DS will be cracking some beers here in North America. But yeah, what a console this was. I'm excited to dive into it. This was an era where I think Nintendo was getting a little nervous. They had the absolute high of the Game Boy Advance to live up to, and they had a new player in town, the PSP. Beforehand, I don't think they had competition really here in the US since the Game Gear. So they had kind of monopolized the handheld gaming market. And in typical Nintendo fashion, they did what they wanted to do. They did something a little different. They didn't go for power. They went for something unique to them, and it truly was a unique gaming experience. The Nintendo DS was not gonna, blow your mind with graphics or anything like that, but the games were different and the games were fun. The Nintendo DS was a bit of a gamble with that unique double screen layout, but it was a huge payoff, and it paid massive dividends for Nintendo. Online sales data shows that between all of the DS models ranging from the DS and DS Lite all the way to the DSi XL, that it sold over 154 million units, which is insane for a handheld. There were two big advantages I think personally Nintendo had over PlayStation when it came to this era of handheld gaming, and one is the DS came out here in the States a bit earlier than the PSP, and two, there was built-in backwards compatibility. So with the DS, you could play any of your Game Boy Advance games, immediately giving you something to play on the system, even if you only had a couple games. So I know the PSP, you could play PS1 games later on, right? You could buy them on the store, or you could transfer them from your PS3. But that ease of backwards compatibility, I always think is a huge selling point, and that ultimately helped a ton. And in typical Nintendo fashion, they really made the multiplayer experience a huge selling point, whether it was local multiplayer or online multiplayer via the Wi-Fi connection. I remember playing a ton of games locally with a lot of friends, whether it was battling and trading against friends in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. That was cool, not having to use a link cable. It was all wireless, which for the time was awesome. So if you weren't around during this era and you're like, man, this dude is tripping, what is he talking about? Like wireless? Yeah, wireless at this point was a big deal, believe it or not. And playing online was cool. I never had the chance to play the DS online, but that was definitely, a big selling point for people too. So yeah, once again, the social connection with Nintendo was there like it always is. And I think that's something that, Sony has always tried to get, but Nintendo has always kind of been the king of local multiplayer. Gamers this generation were incredibly lucky, whether you had a PSP or a DS, or whether you were, lucky enough to have both. The PSP had a great library of games, but so did the DS. Some of the bangers, some of the amazing games on the DS that I love One would be Animal Crossing Wild World. I never had the first one on GameCube, but I played it a ton at my older cousin's house, so I was juiced when I got this on DS, because I was like, wow, I have my own island now, I get to customize it how I want, I get to, other friends who have DSs at school, we get to hang out with each other and show off our islands and whatnot. So Animal Crossing Wild World holds up really well, and graphically it's still my favorite looking Animal Crossing, even though it's probably just nostalgia goggles. But Mario Kart DS was incredible. That's easily my most played Mario Kart game of all time. New Super Mario Bros. What more can I say about that? Amazing Mario game, just your classic Mario fun, side-scrolling, run and jump, take out enemies, and I think that's another one that's really timeless. Another one is Mario 64 DS. The Nintendo 64 was definitely a little bit before my time, so it was cool being able to actually play Mario 64 kind of with a fresh coat of paint. Mind you, there was no analog stick, so playing with the D-pad probably wasn't the best experience, but as a kid, I didn't care. I was just hyped to be able to play Mario 64 on my DS. Another series that got some love here on the DS is Metroid Prime. This game was legendary. From my understanding, there was actually some pretty competitive multiplayer matches that would take place in tournaments and stuff for this back in the day, but I wasn't playing in any of that back in the day, obviously, but it's pretty cool that there was a competitive scene for that. Kirby Mass Attack, I'm a big Kirby fan, so always great to have some great Kirby games. And the Gen 4 Pokemon games, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, and then of course you have the amazing remakes of Gold and Silver. So Heart Gold and Soul Silver, arguably the best Pokemon games of all time, are right here on the DS. And you also have the Gen 5 Pokemon games. So if you're a Pokemon fan, you were well taken care of here on the Nintendo DS. I think the PSP and the DS are still totally worth having today if you don't already have one, whether you're a first-time player of one of the systems, or if you're somebody wanting to go back and kind of revisit some childhood memories. I think games on the PSP still hold up really well, and it's a multimedia device. If you want to go kind of old school and roll with that as an MP3 player, might be kind of cool to not have to deal with any of the streaming services. And the DS, you're going to have some really unique game experiences that you're not going to find on any other system, and I don't think emulating DS games is really the best experience. I don't know, that's one system where I'm like, hey, I really want to play this on physical hardware. So I don't know, this was just a really cool era. I'm really fond of the PSP and the DS. I think they have incredible libraries, and I have a ton of good memories with them as well. So if you can scoop one up for cheap, I think they're definitely worth picking up or scooping up. And if you don't want to go the physical route, if you think games are a little expensive, PSPs are super easy to mod, and R4 cards are dirt cheap for a DS. But yeah, that's going to do it for today's video. I love the PSP, I love the DS, I'm super nostalgic for both of them, and I think both these handhelds still hold up really well, even today, right? If you play a PSP, in my opinion, it doesn't feel that dated. You can still do a lot of cool stuff on it with emulators and whatnot. And then with the DS, it was very unique the way you could play games with the dual screen, and you don't really get that same gaming experience anywhere else today. So yeah, I love this era of consoles. I'm super biased, and yeah, I'll be playing these for many years to come. But as usual, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you soon with another video.